Well, the new Suicide Squad movie is out, and boy, is it sure out. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this particular one, and it's really difficult to just encapsulate it, so it's just going to be one long rambling discussion. Anyway, so here are my thoughts. First off, they wanted it to be even more like the Guardians of the Galaxy in terms of some of its style elements and its comedy, so they tried to have James Gunn write and direct because he was the mind behind the Guardians of the Galaxy series and making it so successful. So it's still dick measuring with Marvel. Just like when they brought Joss Whedon on to try and salvage the Justice League movie. Okay. Well, this one, The Suicide Squad, had Zack Snyder producing. So he still had a lot of say in it, and it shows. Because instead of feeling just like it's, I don't know, like it's just Marvel, but an imitation of Marvel, like the Aldi generic brand or Save-A-Lot generic brand knockoff of Marvel, it also feels like they're ripping off Deadpool, because Zack Snyder cannot have a movie where they don't drop a lot of cussing for no reason, just insert it into the lines for no reason, because that makes it more edgy and adult. But then on top of that, lots of blood splatter, lots of heads exploding in big piles of goo because they saw The Boys or they saw Deadpool and they saw how, one particular character in Deadpool 2 or something like that, just was spraying blood everywhere when he died or something. And I really liked Deadpool 2. And that's because it took time for them to develop it. They knew how far to go here and there. And they made some of the violence and deaths cartoony, and then they underplayed some of the other violent deaths or attacks. So, okay, for example, Deadpool 2, right? You have Vanisher. What happens to Vanisher? Vanisher, you don't see Vanisher most of the time, and when you finally do, it's like, I think it was played by Brad Pitt in a brief cameo, and he's like grabbing an electrical wire and getting zapped, and so it's kind of cartoony because his eyes are all big, and he's jerking around, and he's like flashing in and out because his invisibility is working and not working because he's, being subjected to lethal electricity. And it's horrifying when you think about it that way, but it's cartoony because it's so exaggerated, it's so wild, and, it has that certain dark edge humor to it. And then there's other ones, just throughout. But then you counter that with Domino having the ability to just walk through all kinds of disaster areas and not be completely destroyed. And mind you, this is the Fox Marvel universe, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe or anything like that. So that's a totally different animal from the standard Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I'm sure that Snyder was probably sitting there in his office saying, oh, well, let's try and make it like Deadpool because they were really successful with their 2 movies, and this is our second attempt at making a Suicide Squad movie, and I'm going to produce it, and I'm going to try and help make it into a good version. But I felt like James Gunn's creative input was probably being rather limited by all this. So anyway, the film starts with just you being shoved right into the action, and they're assembling a team, and they're focusing on the one character of Savant, played by Michael Rooker, because he just finished his character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so let's bring him on to our Guardians of the Galaxy movie, or our Suicide Squad movie. That was not intended just now, but it really is just... they're trying. They're really trying. So they have an entire team assembled, but, you've got Pete Davidson, but we haven't seen any pictures of him in the movie so far. I wonder why. You've got Sean Gunn as Weasel, and Weasel is a completely CGI character. They bring him back at the end for no reason, just to show he's not dead, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a little after the movie, oh, by the way, Weasel survived. Well, thank you for that. I was really wondering how the Weasel was doing. And I'm not talking about Pauly Shore. Anyway, so you've got Captain Boomerang there, and then Harley Quinn shows up at the very end. And it's just like, okay, fine. So we've got kind of a B team. We don't know what all of them do. Unlike last time, where it was kind of introduced, we took the time to learn what each of them does. And that's because we quickly learn that this is the B team. This is not the team that's being sent in to handle the problem. So all of them are considered expendable? And I'm not even kidding. Within the first, so many minutes of the film, before they really start the actual story, they just show this team that you've assembled, the one character named Savant. We don't even know what he does. He's just thrown in there as cannon fodder. I'm like, okay. But they send in Captain Boomerang, and Captain Boomerang is shown to be highly effective. You've got a character named Mongol, who is, again, highly effective. And we already know that Harley Quinn is very effective. But, yeah. So they just go ahead and they decide, oh, well, we're gonna send in this team to distract. That's the big reveal, is that Amanda Waller is as much of the villain of this story as before. She's not, some kind of gray character who, just brings the team together and then they end up doing good despite their characters because she brought them together and sent them in with the right person. No. Anyway, so I was really, really frustrated with that because, we've got characters we like. We don't hate Captain Boomerang, but, don't really like him that much, but we don't hate him. We already know him well enough. And we aren't getting introduced to any of the other characters, and we already know that some of the other characters in the film are played by different actors, so those are the ones we have to look out for. So when do they come in? Do they come in to rescue our team? No, it turns out that there's another team being sent in that is intended to actually solve whatever problem it is. And, I don't even know, because we're not even following that team. We're following another team still with Bloodsport, Peacemaker, Ratcatcher 2, and King Shark and the Polka Dot Man. And okay, here's another thought. Oh, did you like Sylvester Stallone in his brief cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy 2? Well, we'll bring him on as King Shark. And he's nothing like the King Shark, Nimue, that you met in the Harley Quinn solo series on the DC Animated, because Zack Snyder doesn't like his products to be anything like anything you've ever seen before elsewhere. And really, that's part of the problem. Zack Snyder can't let his work be anything like anyone else's in the DC universe. When you produce a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, or even a Fox Marvel movie, or a Sony Marvel movie, they bother to at least leave room for something to be tied in. The X-Men movies can still be tied in with the MCU, if they wanted to. The Fox Cinematic Universe, the Sony Cinematic Universe already has been, of course. They finally did that with the current incarnation of Spider-Man. They bothered to have him in Civil War, and they bothered to have Tony Stark in Homecoming, and then they had Nick Fury in the second Spider-Man movie from that, Far From Home, right? And guess what? It worked. So anyway, you're introduced to a whole bunch of of different characters that make absolutely no difference in anything from the beginning. And then you're finally introduced to our actual characters. And the writer even makes a point that Peacemaker and Bloodsport are basically the same guy, but Peacemaker, the guy with the chrome-plated helmet, who I thought was Orion for some reason, because he looks a lot like Orion. Anyway, they're basically the same guy. So why are you sending in two people with exactly the same skills and abilities? That just didn't quite make sense. But you're making Bloodsport the leader, and that doesn't quite pay off in terms of the story, because it turns out that Peacemaker has a separate mission from Waller where she wants him to retrieve a hard drive from the fortress that they're trying to infiltrate and destroy. But yeah, that's how problematic this is. You've got stuff introduced. Oh, well, we've got research here on this hard drive that you're going to want. No, I'm here to destroy it because it's not enough that we're blowing up the building. This hard drive might somehow survive being blown up and crushed under rubble, so we're going to instead make sure that that hard drive gets destroyed, even though we don't know that that hard drive actually contains the research data on this thing. So yeah. Anyway, so I was really disappointed that they bothered to make King Shark stupid when in a lot of other incarnations, King Shark is not the brightest person, but he's not stupid. He has a level of intelligence approaching that of a human. He has a lot of socialization of that of a human. But in this one, they just make him absolutely stupid just because there's literally a point where Bloodsport, who is taking the place of Deadshot, I think, in this one. I don't know. Maybe they couldn't get Will Smith back, but they could get Idris Elba. Oh, we're not cannibalizing from the MCU anymore. We've just got Idris Elba after his character died off in the Thor movies. Anyway, so, yeah. But anyway, he stands there and he says, "Hey, King Shark, go and attack the bad guys. You know, you can eat them." And you know, he's literally just like, King Shark, monster nom nom, instead of Captain America telling Hulk to smash like in the Avengers. And it's like, wow, so we're ripping off the Avengers as well. We're ripping off Guardians of the Galaxy, Deadpool, and the Avengers. Yeah. That's really something, folks. You really got to be working hard to rip off of 3 separate franchises by 2 different studios. I just was really amazed. Anyway, so that was just wild. But in the end, because it's James Gunn, and James Gunn actually likes to do things that are creative and dig up characters that are kind of off the beaten track, and they wanted to do a Deadpool, which involved getting characters that were off the beaten track and had never really been portrayed, or at least portrayed faithfully. Like, oh my god, Juggernaut in X-Men 3 was so not faithful to the Marvel version. They gave him like a totally different style helmet, but then in Deadpool they actually stayed more faithful to the comic books in terms of his size, in terms of the style of helmet he has, everything. So he's actually much more like the comic book. It was really refreshing, but you know, Zack Snyder can't have that. No, it has to be its own thing. But James Gunn is like, no, let's make it like out of the comic book. That's what the fans are expecting. Let's make it as much like the comic book as possible and just tell our own story. But unfortunately, because of Zack Snyder's influence, it feels more like the story just meanders. It just goes from one part to another. They actually bother to insert titles for the next section of the story Operation this, Operation that. And it's kind of, or Meanwhile, Harley, and it's like written into the background or written into the part of the scene that they're in. And you can just see the storyboarding at that point. It's like, oh, so they actually drew that on as like kind of an attempt to be creative. Okay. No other comic book movie has bothered to do that. I'll give you that. It's creative. It's different. It's a different way of narrating. It's clunky, but it does it. Instead of just having your characters say. Or because you're about to cut to whatever. Anyway, so in order to get Margot Robbie back, they couldn't just have her character die off. They had to give her character an entire plot. Plus, Margot Robbie is a big star right now. She just had the mediocre Cruella de Vil movie. She's had her own Harley Quinn movie. And their immediate question was like, Harley, what are you even doing here? And she's just like, I got caught for like driving through a bank, basically, and it's like, oh, it's something stupid that makes no sense and has no bearing on what you were just in when we last saw you. At this point, I'm not even talking about the cartoon. I'm talking directly about the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie that we saw and that people liked. And that's the whole reason why she's in this movie, instead of just saying, oh, well, they needed to bring me on and they offered me a bunch of money, which would have actually been funny because it would have been a nod to the fact that Margot Robbie, they needed her and they offered her a bunch of money. It would have been a funny little fourth wall break, which would have been even more in keeping with the Deadpool aesthetic that they were trying to go for. I mean, honestly. But beyond all that, you've got all kinds of other little things in the story that James Gunn clearly influenced, like the use of Starro the Conqueror, which was great, because Starro is a big baddie. And when you want to go up against a big baddie, it's hard to go any bigger than Starro. I mean, just in the DC universe, when you're looking at this stuff, with Guardians of the Galaxy, it went with one baddie and then another, and it escalated a little bit. Like, oh, instead of just dooming several worlds within the galaxy and maybe eventually the entire galaxy, and he's a servant of Thanos, trying to get Thanos this one stone. Instead, Ego is going to possibly destroy all life in the galaxy that he's encountered, and is going to, just spread himself everywhere. Insert your man-spreading joke here. Anyway, so it's weird that they bothered to do it that way, but one of the highlights of the film is Thinker, played by Peter Capaldi, because previously the only incarnation of Thinker that we've seen has been in The Flash. He was like a season-long story arc villain, and this is a totally different incarnation of the character, but it feels very cartoony and comic booky. And frankly, if they were to dial down the blood splatter and get rid of the cussing, you would actually have a really dynamite story here. Because you know what the other really popular DC movie was? Shazam. I mean, it was so good that I actually gave it a 5 out of 5. I don't give 5 out of 5 to just any movie. I have to really genuinely enjoy it, and any flaws or problems I have with it have to be so minute or compensated for that I think that you, the viewer, will enjoy it no matter what. If I don't think that anyone will enjoy it, I will give it a low rating. And I have given some films absolutely low ratings in my reviews before. So this is, this one tries to be too many things at once instead of trying to be just its own one thing. And a lot of that comes from the studio and the producer interfering and trying to say, oh no, we've got to make it more like Marvel. And it's like, no, don't make it like Marvel. That's the problem. What Marvel movie was Shazam like? You tell me. Was Shazam like any Marvel movie? Was Wonder Woman like any other? Was Wonder Woman like any Marvel movie? Just the first one. Was Aquaman like any other Marvel movie? Not really. I was actually worried that Aquaman was basically going to be Thor, and it wasn't. It really worked its way away from being too derivative. One thing I will give the Suicide Squad is that it feels less rushed. It feels more like they actually took time to develop each story and pace each story in editing. And that makes a huge difference, because when I was watching the first film, Suicide Squad, enough times, I finally said, you know what? I know there were problems with editing. I know that they took it to a trailer company that just like edits trailers for the big studios, and that's what they did with like the first 30 minutes of this. They basically tried to make it just like an extended trailer, but that doesn't work. And they kept shoving in music just as part of everything for like the better part of the movie, and they couldn't do very much, so it ends up beginning and ending with this little musical montage of different top 40 songs because Guardians of the Galaxy. Here they don't do that as much. They really don't even play up the soundtrack as much, so you don't feel as much like it's borrowing that stylistic element, because you've already got the director. You can't just say, okay, Mr. James Gunn, let's just make let's make Guardians of the Galaxy, only it's Suicide Squad. And it's like, Guardians of the Galaxy is nothing like the Suicide Squad in terms of its origins, in terms of its nature. Yes, you have a scene in Guardians of the Galaxy where they're all in prison, but that's as far as the connection goes, because prior to that, they are all very distinct people. Prison is just what brings them together, but they are not released on condition that they do certain things for the government and then put right back in prison. They are not subject to anyone once they get out of prison. They are trying to, they have a goal. They have this MacGuffin for the story that is the Mind Stone, and the Mind Stone is playing into this larger story of the Infinity War that's coming with Thanos and everything. And this is even closer to the Thanos storyline, because this Ronan the Accuser guy actually works directly for Thanos. So this is a really dangerous story, and they have to give it the colors and the weird places that you go to in comic book space stories. So Suicide Squad is Earthbound, so you don't have as many of the weird locations. But when I was watching enough of the first film, I was really genuinely frustrated by the editing, the really awful, sloppy editing that made so many things too succinct and too broken up. So I just had to do a fan edit, and I ended up making it a bit shorter. I didn't have any like deleted scenes or anything to shove in, so I just made sure to have the stories be all connected. Okay? So, like, good example, and this was one that really spurred me and was the proud moment of accomplishment. You've got a scene with Deadshot, right? He's in prison. He's getting beaten up by the guards because he mouthed off. And so, how did he get there? Well, here's so many months earlier, and he's doing a contract, and the person who paid him didn't meet his terms, and so he's like, your target is going into hiding, he's getting away, you either pay me or, we're not doing the deal. And then cut to elsewhere a short while later, and there's Deadshot with his kid, and they're going Christmas shopping or something there in Gotham. So it's It's a different setting. And then, oh, as they're turning the corner, Batman snatches up Deadshot and arrests him. That at least made sense. That way you've got a contiguous story from one portion to another, enough that it would make a successful chapter, if you will, for that. And you don't need very much introduction on that. You don't need to explain, oh, well, this was doing this, and oh, this was how it all happened. And, you don't need as much of Amanda Waller sitting at a table in a restaurant in Washington late one night with someone explaining, oh, well, this is what happened. You don't need that if you're just showing. And you don't need to introduce it if you're looking at that character for a little bit. And then, in my version, okay, we cut to Harley over at Arkham Asylum, and we show her interacting with the Joker, and we get a little bit of a synopsis of what happens with them, and just follow it through until she's in prison. So I ended up doing a lot of creative stuff with the fan edit of that, and you can check out the first 10 redo that I did on that, which has the first 10 minutes of the movie remade, just using what they already had. And it's me then telling you everything of what I did and then everything of what I did with the rest of the movie. And a lot of it is just trimming the fat. A lot of it is just, does this go anywhere? No? Then get rid of it. Unless it actually does something for the story, like gives them a character turning moment, then don't bother with it. There is a character turning moment in this story. There are a few of them. But one of the big ones is when Bloodsport has a heart-to-heart with Ratcatcher 2. And she tells him all about how, she was growing up, and Ratcatcher, her dad, taught her everything he knew, and it was just really, it wasn't the best life, but there was a lot of love, and he cared about her and wanted to give her the best of everything. So, anyway, it's not horrible. It's a genuine character moment, and it's told well, because you have Ratcatcher 2 looking out the window, and she's reflecting, but the funny part there is the story, the visual element of the story is reflected in the glass of the window on the car that she's in. So you're seeing into her memories through a literal reflection while she's reflecting. That was really good, and I can only think that came from James Gunn. Another good element is the Polka Dot Man. They don't play him up as if he's a simpleton or as if he is worthless or something, even though at first they do make him seem like really worthless. They're like, oh, what do you shoot polka dots at people? And Waller just stands there, and they're like, he does shoot polka dots at people? And they just go ahead and say, you suck. And it's like, but then they actually see what he can do, and they see that the polka dots are actually like little bursts of energy. So it's actually pretty awesome. And it's like, okay, I appreciate that. That's great. Because it means Waller wasn't just sending him in as more cannon fodder, but was actually sending him in because he's incredibly capable. And they give him this really interesting backstory that he talks about very briefly. He doesn't harp on it very long. They just ask him, what is your deal? Why do you have these big, bright, colorful polka dots all over you? Why do you have to go off alone and then suddenly we see polka dots everywhere? What's with that? And he just explains, and it has to do with his mom, and he sees his mom everywhere in everyone that he's around. And then they cut to things from his point of view, and literally everyone is his mom. he looks at King Shark and sees a big giant shark version of his mom. He looks at Harley, not Harley Quinn because she's not there at that time, but looks at every single character, and they're all his mom, who is this kind of overweight, average-looking woman with glasses, and that's just who he sees. He has kind of a face blindness where everyone just ends up looking like his mom, who did this to him. And I won't go into the details there because it's actually kind of fun. But anyway, Bloodsport ends up being one of the best characters of the film, and I'm really glad that they put that in, because you don't waste an Idris Elba. You don't get Idris Elba onto a project and then just say, oh, well, we'll just kill his character off or something. They do kill off a lot of the characters, though. Characters you already know, characters you really come to like. And then for some reason they kill off a character named Milton, and then make a point about how nobody was really paying attention to Milton, and how Harley didn't even know his name. It's like, well, you could have just had him waiting in the car instead of dying there. And then maybe he runs away. Because in Deadpool, they don't kill off Sanjeev. They make sure that Sanjeev lives, even though he is the least likely person to survive. I don't know. But given this was written by James Gunn, I'm still guessing that the producers were like, no, work it different. We're going to have you work it different. I don't know. But as it is, you really come to like Rick Flag, whereas in the previous movie you didn't like him. They actually got Nathan Fillion to be in this. And I was so mad at the character that they gave him, and at the fact that he's in that B team at the start of the movie. Like, I'm fine with Pete Davidson not being there for the entire movie, because you can't carry a movie with Pete Davidson. He's someone that you put on for a few minutes, and then you kill off his character. Because he's just kind of an annoying person. But, whenever he acts or whatever. But anyway, as it is, the film does play up really well. It has a very satisfying resolution, because how the heck is a small team like this going to defeat Starro the Conqueror, except exactly why you would send in a team like the Suicide Squad? Because they play dirty. They don't play fair. They're just as liable to die, so, they're going to fight as if, they're dead anyway. So it plays up well. It does well by the time you get to the end. And James Gunn, I think, respected the source material enough to write a compelling story about that, because the Suicide Squad is really genuinely a very compelling group when you look at it. Part of the problem with the Snyderverse is that he likes to make all of his heroes into anti-heroes. That was the whole thing he did with Watchmen. All the heroes are just really self-interested douchebags who don't really care about anyone else. And that was what Garth Ennis did with The Boys. Oh, all the superheroes are really just self-interested douchebags who don't care about anyone else. Well, in this one, they aren't superheroes, and they aren't even super villains. They're just villains. Like, some of them are super villains, but some of them are also just people who are not able to fit in. Like King Shark, he's not going to be able to fit in with normal society. Polka Dot Man, he's not able to fit in with normal society. He's isolated by his condition. The others, Bloodsport, Peacemaker rather, all that, they're able to settle in okay, but they were both trained by their parents to be like the best killers in the world. They explain that. And Ratcatcher 2 was raised to be like, just queen of the rats. So it makes a certain amount of sense that they don't have an easy time assimilating. It really does. It makes a certain amount of sense. So each of these characters all have a difficult time settling in the world, and so sending them on these missions makes a certain amount of sense because they're miserable in prison, they don't get along with others, they don't have a very easy time, but they do make a point that each of these characters really does have an amazing ability. Ratcatcher 2 absolutely has fantastic ability to relate to and summon rats. And they make a point that that is actually really impressive considering how many rats there are in the world and how tenacious rats are and how rats are really able to just tear up and destroy. If they were to swarm, rats can really do some damage. So, and even Polka Dot Man, it's like, oh, well, what can you do? Well, the polka dots are bolts of energy that can explode. So, yeah, it's kind of a Jubilee character, but at the same time, at least it's something, you know. And that's really where the success of the Deadpool movies and some of the Marvel movies with the lesser-known characters work. Because you're taking these characters that some writer somewhere bothered to come up with at some point, even if it's a silly character, like the Polka Dot Man, and you're bothering to make it into something else, something different, something unique. You're applying them in a way that is fun. And that's the whole point of a superhero story, is you're having a character who has these special, fantastic abilities, and you're getting to see them try things out in new and different ways. That's the whole point of a superhero TV show or a superhero movie. Oh, maybe I can use my powers to do it this way. Every time I've watched The Flash or something like that, you know, and The Flash is easily one of the best shows on the DC live action side of things. But he just flat out uses his powers very differently. Likewise, in the Harley Quinn series, you've got a lot of tertiary characters that you don't know that much about. Dr. Psycho, King Shark, of course. And then you've got all kinds of well-known villains and superheroes that you're dealing with. And, you know, Poison Ivy is able to use her powers differently in the show. She has her character a little bit from Batman in the animated series. And it works, you know. But the whole point is, they're thinking about it creatively. They're not saying, oh, well, the only one that really matters is Superman. No. And like, oh, what can the Flash do? He can just run really fast. He can't really do anything else. And it's like, no. If you watch the TV show, you actually learn that the Flash actually learns to use his powers in lots of different ways. Not just running all over the place, but actually doing lots of different things at super speed, you know? So give him a little bit of credit. And then you've got what I really wish they had done. This is me. What I really wish they had done is I wish that they had taken a page from Legends of Tomorrow, and instead of making Suicide Squad into yet another movie, because it's like, okay, well, where's this going? Is there actually a point to having the Suicide Squad here? Is that actually leading to another story later on? Or is it just another DC Cinematic Universe vehicle? Well, it really is just another movie for the sake of making another movie, rather than building to something, which is the problem. So, if you're gonna do Suicide Squad, don't do it as a live action movie. Do it as an animated series on streaming. Do it on HBO Max, an animated series, just like, or heck, if you want to do live action, go ahead and do live action, but do it like Doom Patrol. Because guess what? People like Doom Patrol, and Doom Patrol is dark. And it has some weird characters that are just hauled out of nowhere that you've never heard of before, other than Cyborg. And even Cyborg is not the Cyborg that you've met elsewhere. You know, you've got characters like in Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey that you've never heard of. You know, you've got a few characters that you've heard of, but not too many. They haven't really been interpreted into the live-action version too much or the animated versions too much. So you've got a little bit more there. You've got this entire cavalcade of different DC characters from over decades that you have to tap into. And that's the secret, is go ahead and pull out characters that people haven't heard of and put them in this movie. Put them in this show, whatever it is. You just look at the first Deadpool movie and it's like, okay, well, who can we get? We can get Colossus. Well, we'll just do that as an animated character. He's always in his metal mode. That way we don't have to have a live actor. We can just have like this metal statue man there for the entire movie. And then who else will we get? Oh, we'll get... who's an obscure character that nobody cares about using anymore? Negasonic Teenage Warhead. And it's great. Because it's like, okay, well, what can this character do? Well, she generates this field of energy around her, and she can punch, and she can run into things and make, blow them away and whatever. So she's basically like a small atomic bomb whenever she goes into a fight. She has this ability to harness this power. Okay, that's really cool. Let's do that. But let's not use her too much, because she would be too easy a character to have dominate the entire thing. So, let's have her play her part on the team. And it works. And even in the sequel, her girlfriend Yuki, she has the ability to like kind of do a gambit thing where she can energize something, and she decides to energize rope that she throws around things and whatnot. Okay. You could easily have that be an entire story just around that character or those two characters, but instead they're part of it. So it works. They're obscure characters that you haven't heard of before, and it works. You got and for when Deadpool was assembling his team, he bothered to choose. The writers bothered to choose really obscure characters from way back in the day that everyone had forgotten about and were just kind of one-off characters for a few stories, maybe, and that was about it. So it works. When you bother to tap into the vast resources of creativity from over the years and maybe do a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, elbow in the side, making fun of this character, saying, oh, well, yeah, this person from the planet Mojo is better at us than everything, but, what happens, his long hair kind of gets in the way and he ends up paragliding into some helicopter blades. And, a little bit of commentary from Deadpool. I guess you weren't better than us at everything, and that's funny because it's like, well, what would this character even do? It's like, this character is like some writer's real fantasy character. They came up with this person, and it was a real ego trip, and they wanted this person to become the star of their own story. And it's like, no, this person's not interesting enough, because if they're better at us than everything, what is the point? Where's the conflict? So, anyway, with this one, there's plenty of conflict for sure, just among the non-metas, just among the regular everyday people. So there's an entire story back surrounding Waller, because she is more than happy to kill every single one of the Suicide Squad and let Starro the Conqueror destroy Corto Maltese, whatever. And not having the perspective that, when this thing is done with Corto Maltese, what's stopping it from taking over the world? We need to help stop it now. And that's what the Suicide Squad decides to do. And she's like, no, I'm going to kill all of you. You're driving me crazy. I'm going to lose my temper. And her team around her, back at base, are like, okay, you've lost it. So she's no longer like the Nick Fury character bringing together a group of unlikely people. So it just... I appreciate that James Gunn was willing to do that, because he also understood Amanda Waller's character well enough and understood the role that an everyday person can play in the story, rather than just making it all about these super amazing people that can do everything and are the best at everything and are unstoppable, which is what Zack Snyder tends to go for. So, anyway, with all that said and that much of the movie ruined for you, what do I give it? Well, it's not very good. It has a lot going for it, but it has a lot of caveats too. So it gets a 3 out of 5. It's right there in the middle of the road. But I'm giving it on the upside of that rather than giving it the 2.5, because it's just good enough to be enjoyable at parts, but unlike the previous one where I really didn't enjoy it from beginning to end, and it was just kind of an endurance, this one, you can actually enjoy several parts of it. It's relatively fun, sort of, but not like the best thing ever. But they do pull it out in the end. They do make it worth watching by the time you're done. And I think a lot of that has to do with the writer-director. They went with a good choice there. Someone who actually understood how to make sequences and stories fun and satisfying for the audience, rather than just making it all about, oh, well, this is the best character ever and they're unbeatable, and I'm the best director ever because I show you lots of blood and curvy women in tight clothing and lots of cussing. It's like, no, Zach, you're not that good a director. Sorry to break it to you. You know, I just don't even know where to begin with that, but that's where we'll end. So yeah, the film is kind of dragged down, unfortunately, as I said before, by the producer and the studio, but James Gunn managed to do a pretty good job with the story here overall, without being too derivative of his other superhero work. So with that, thanks for clicking over and listening. Take care. Bye-bye.